You've heard of bipolar disorder, but did you know there are two different types, bipolar I and bipolar II? I have bipolar I. While the two types have many similarities, they also have some important differences. A lot of people don't know the difference between the two, or they mix them up. Some believe that one is the more severe form of bipolar disorder and the other is the milder version, but that's not really true. In this video, I'm going to explain the difference between bipolar I and bipolar II without reading the DSM to you or making it confusing. So let's talk about it. Why are there two types of bipolar disorder, and how can you tell if someone has bipolar I or bipolar II? I'm Patty, the girl with blue energy. I have bipolar disorder and I make videos about mental health and personal growth. So let's start by talking about the history of bipolar disorder and why there are two different types of bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder has been around for centuries, long before we had the DSM. Hippocrates first described the symptoms of bipolar disorder using the terms melancholia or depression and mania. At the time, these were considered two separate conditions. In the 1850s, John Fallret described a condition that included both mania and depression in one illness. He called it follicircular or circular insanity. Then in 1952, almost 100 years later, the first diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders was published, or the DSM-1. This was the first manual to categorize and standardize psychiatric disorders. In the DSM-1, bipolar disorder was originally called manic depressive reactions, and it was categorized under psychotic disorders. Subtypes of the disorder were based on how the person presented, so either manic, depressed, or other. When the DSM-2 was published in 1968, manic depressive reactions was renamed manic depressive illness and was reclassified as an affective disorder or mood disorder. When the DSM-3 was published in 1980, the term manic depressive illness was renamed once again, and this was when it was changed to bipolar disorder, but it was still considered one single condition. It wasn't until the DSM-4 was published in 1994 that bipolar II was formally added as a distinct diagnosis. So we haven't always had a bipolar disorder type 1 and 2. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much confusion. Let's talk about the key differences between bipolar I and bipolar II. Even though we stopped using the term manic depression, people still use manic and depression when they talk about bipolar disorder. This is why many people still believe that bipolar disorder is the same thing as the outdated diagnosis manic depression, meaning that if you have bipolar disorder, you always have mania and depression. But this isn't entirely true. Not everyone experiences full mania, and you don't even have to have depression to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Did you know that? Since this is a bit confusing, let me explain. Both types of bipolar disorder experience mood episodes with highs and lows, but the episodes and the severity are different. The main difference between bipolar I and bipolar II is the type of mania you experience, hypomania or mania, but that's not the only difference. I'm going to start by explaining the difference between mania and hypomania, because people often use these terms interchangeably. The DSM-5 has specific criteria for diagnosing mania or hypomania. Mania and hypomania both cause elevated or irritable moods with increased activity or energy. And the symptoms for both mania and hypomania are basically the same. What makes them different is the severity and the duration. These are the symptoms you might have if you are experiencing a manic or hypomanic episode. And I use the mnemonic DIG FAST, which is a mnemonic many health professionals use to remember the symptoms and criteria for a manic episode. So they are distractibility, impulsivity or indiscretion, like excessive involvement in pleasurable activities, grandiosity or an inflated self-esteem, flight of ideas or racing thoughts, activity increase or an increase in goal-directed behavior, sleep deficit, a decreased need for sleep or insomnia, and talkativeness or pressured speech. The key difference between mania and hypomania is the severity and the duration. Both involve a period of unusually elevated, overly confident, or irritable mood with increased energy or goal-directed activity. But with mania, it is more severe, and it causes a marked impairment in functioning. It also must last longer than a week or require hospitalization, and it may involve psychosis. Hypomania, on the other hand, must last at least 4 consecutive days. There will be a noticeable change in functioning, but it's not so severe that it causes impairment or that you need to be hospitalized. It also does not cause psychosis. If there is psychosis, it's no longer considered hypomania, but instead considered mania. With both mania and hypomania, you must meet at least 3 additional criteria, or 4 if your mood is only irritable. And those criteria come from the list before that I shared with you, the Dig Fast list of symptoms. In order to be diagnosed with bipolar I, you need to have experienced at least 1 manic episode. A lot of people with bipolar disorder will also have episodes of depression, but that is not a requirement to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. If you've had 1 episode of mania, that meets the diagnostic criteria for bipolar I. Even though you only need 1 manic episode to be diagnosed with bipolar I, most people go on to have more mood episodes. 90% of people with bipolar I will have more than just 1 manic episode. They will go on to have recurrent mood episodes, either manic, depressed, or mixed episodes. Bipolar II is similar. If you have bipolar II, you must have experienced at least 1 hypomanic episode, but you also must have experienced at least 1 episode of major depression. Now, major depression isn't just feeling down. It means that you have depression that lasts at least 2 weeks and is severe and significantly affects your life. Bipolar II is sometimes misdiagnosed, and this is because people often seek out help for their symptoms of depression, and they may not seek out help when they're having a hypomanic episode. And since the hypomania is not as severe as the mania, plus if the doctor isn't seeing the hypomania and the person isn't reporting it, it's easy to understand how it can sometimes be misdiagnosed. In fact, research suggests that around 12% of people originally diagnosed with major depression eventually end up being diagnosed with bipolar II. And on top of that, around 5 to 15% of people diagnosed with bipolar II will go on to be diagnosed with bipolar I after they experience a manic episode. Let's discuss the frequently asked questions people have about bipolar I versus bipolar II. One of the most common questions people have is, which is worse? And the answer is neither. They're really just different. If you have bipolar I, you may experience manic episodes that are severe that may cause psychosis or result in hospitalization. But if you have bipolar II, while you have the hypomanic episodes and not the manic episodes, you have more frequent and longer duration episodes of depression. And those can be quite severe and can also be extremely difficult to live with. So neither is worse or better. They are just different and the symptoms are different. So the next question is, Does hypomania that lasts longer than a week mean that you're manic? So if you look at the criteria for hypomania and mania, you'll see that for hypomania, it must last at least 4 days. And for mania, it must last at least a week or longer. So some people think that if your hypomania lasts longer than a week, then that means that you're manic because the criteria says mania is longer than a week. But in actuality, both bipolar I and bipolar II, you can experience hypomania, and it can last any kind of duration. So it can last a few days or a few weeks, but that doesn't make it mania. The mania is diagnosed based on how severe it is, not how long it is. Along with that, the next question is, can you experience mixed states with bipolar II or just bipolar I? So a lot of people think that mixed states or mixed episodes only happen if you have bipolar I. If you don't know what a mixed state is, this is when you experience basically both depression and mania at the same time. Well, mixed states can happen whether you have bipolar I or bipolar II. It's just that if you have bipolar II, it's hypomania mixed with depression. And if you have bipolar I, it can either be mania or hypomania mixed with depression. You don't experience the mania with bipolar II, but you definitely can experience a mixed state with hypomania and depression. Which is more common? Bipolar I and bipolar II have similar rates of diagnosis. So one of them is not more common than the other, but bipolar II is sometimes misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because the hypomania may be harder to spot, harder to notice, and the person may not report it because they may not realize it is hypomania, whereas mania is usually hard to miss. Can you have bipolar disorder and not know it? The answer to that is yes. If you have bipolar II, you can go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed because the hypomania may be mistaken for productivity, extra energy, or your personality. Because hypomania doesn't necessarily cause severe impairment, people don't always report the symptoms, or the symptoms might not be recognized. Now, if you have bipolar I, you're probably going to end up hospitalized at some point because the symptoms of mania are pretty severe and hard not to notice. How does the treatment for bipolar I and bipolar II differ? Treatment is actually pretty similar for bipolar I and bipolar II. However, the focus may be different. So if you have bipolar I, the focus of treatment is usually on controlling or preventing manic episodes. If you have bipolar II, the treatment is usually focused more on treating the depression. So you may be given a mood stabilizer along with an antidepressant. However, antidepressants are used cautiously with both types because antidepressants can trigger mania, hypomania, or mixed episodes. I hope this video helped make bipolar I and bipolar II easier to understand. If you have bipolar I or bipolar II, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks again, guys. If you found this video helpful, please click the like button and, of course, subscribe. I'll see you guys again soon.